Joseph Paul Franklin, also known as the Racist Killer, was an American white supremacist serial killer, attempted assassin, bomber and homegrown terrorist, active in several states from 1977 to 1980. He is most famous for his assassination attempt on magazine publisher Larry Flynt, which left the latter permanently crippled. Franklin was eventually executed in 2013. Franklin was born James Clayton Vaughn Jr. in Mobile, Alabama, the eldest son of James Clayton Vaughn Sr. and Helen Rao Vaughn. His father, a World War II veteran and butcher, was an alcoholic drifter who usually spent months, if not years, away from his family, then returned to physically abuse his children. Helen was described as a strict and abusive woman and was said by Franklin himself to have never really cared about him or his siblings, who were given rarely enough to eat. Years later, Franklin would state that his dysfunctional childhood affected his emotional development, so that he practically was 10 years or more behind other people in their maturity. In his high school years, Franklin did poorly as a student, while developing an interest in evangelical Christianity. He later dropped out after an accident left his eyesight severely impaired, consequently exempting him from military conscription. He got married twice, first with Bobby Lee Dorman in 1968, and then with Anita Carden in 1979. His first marriage lasted 4 months, while the second one lasted 1 year. He is known to have battered both of his wives. Bobby Dorman said she would sometimes find him weeping for no apparent reason. During his teens, he had come into contact with far-right and neo-Nazism, eventually joining the National Socialist White People's Party, currently known as the American Nazi Party, and, after his mother's death in 1972, the segregationist movement. Moving to Atlanta, he also enlisted in the National States' Rights Party, along with the local Ku Klux Klan. Within those groups, Franklin came to dislike the fact that all most of his fellow members seemed to want to do was talking, while he was ready to take action. He began insulting interracial couples in public, in one instance spraying them with self-defense spray. In 1976, he wrote a letter to President Jimmy Carter threatening to kill him for his pro-civil rights views. In the same year, he changed his name to Joseph Paul Franklin, honoring both Nazi Minister of Propaganda Paul Joseph Goebbels and Benjamin Franklin. Franklin would later state that he decided to start a race war after reading a copy of Mein Kampf, while also claiming to have been inspired by Charles Manson's Helter Skelter. Franklin spent the years 1977 to 1980 wandering across several states, primarily in the South and Midwest, employing pseudonyms, changing cars and weapons frequently, dyeing his hair to the point it came close to falling out in a one-man crusade against people he considered inferior, mostly interracial couples and Jews. He would sustain himself by committing robberies and paying blood bank donations. On the 25th of July, 1977, he detonated a dynamite bomb outside the Rockville, Maryland, home of Jewish lobbyist, attorney, and at the time executive director of the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, Morris J. Amatei. While the latter and his family managed to escape, their house dog was killed in the explosion. 4 days later, in Chattanooga, Tennessee, he firebombed and destroyed the Beth Shalom synagogue, though there were no casualties or injuries. On the 7th of August, Franklin shot a young interracial couple, Alphonse Manning Jr. and Tony Schwinn, in a Madison, Wisconsin parking lot. Almost 2 months later, he shot at people attending services at a St. Louis, Missouri, synagogue. Gerald Gordon, 42, was killed, while 2 others were left wounded. On the 2nd of February, 1978, Franklin shot and killed Johnny Brookshire, wounding his white wife, Joy Williams. On the 6th of March, he shot Hustler publisher Larry Flynt and his lawyer Gene Reeves in Lawrenceville, Georgia. Flynt was left permanently crippled by the shooting. Franklin would later state he did it in retaliation for Hustler depicting interracial sex. On the 29th of July, again in Chattanooga, he shot and killed William Bryant Tatum, a black man, also injuring his white girlfriend, Nancy Hilton. On the 12th of July, 1979, in Doraville, Georgia, he shot and killed black Taco Bell manager Harold McIver for being in close contact with white women. On the 18th of August, he shot and killed Raymond Taylor, a 28-year-old black man who was sitting inside of Falls Church, Virginia, Burger King. On the 21st of October, he killed yet another interracial couple, Jesse Taylor and Marion Brissett, in the parking lot of a Oklahoma City shopping center. On the 5th of December, he shot to death a 15-year-old prostitute named Mercedes Lynn Master, with whom he briefly lived with in DeKalb County, Georgia. Franklin would later say he did it because she had African-American customers. While in Indianapolis, Franklin shot and killed two black males, Lawrence Reese and Leo Watkins, on the 12th and 14th of January 1980. On May 3, he shot to death a young white hitchhiker, Rebecca Bergstrom, dumping her body near Tomah in central Wisconsin. On May 29, in Fort Wayne, Indiana, civil rights activist and Urban League president Vernon Jordan Jr. was shot and seriously wounded while in the company of a white woman. Franklin at first denied being responsible for the attempt and was acquitted, though he later confessed. He also admitted having planned to kill another civil rights activist before Jordan, Julian Bond. On the 8th of June, he shot and killed Darrell Lane and his cousin Dante Evans Brown in Cincinnati. On the 15th of June, he shot an interracial couple, Arthur Smothers and Kathleen Mikula, in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. 10 days later, in Pocahontas County, West Virginia, he picked up two white hitchhikers, Nancy Santamero and Vicky Durian, and brought them to a wooded area where he shot them both to death. Franklin would later say he decided to do it after one of the young girls said she had a black boyfriend. On the 20th of August, he shot two black joggers, Ted Fields and David Martin, as they were leaving a Salt Lake City park with two white women. One of the latter was also slightly wounded. Franklin left Utah, relocating first to Nevada, then to San Francisco, California. On the 25th of September, 1980, he was arrested in Florence, Kentucky, where he managed to escape from custody through a police department window. He was eventually recaptured almost a month later in Lakeland, Florida, while paying a blood bank donation. In 1981, after he was extradited back to Salt Lake City, he was convicted of both state and federal offenses related to the murders of Fields and Martin. He began to serve his life sentences in the United States Penitentiary of Marion, Illinois, where he was repeatedly stabbed by a group of African-American inmates. In 1986, after confessing several of his crimes, he was convicted of the murders of Alphonse Manning, Jr. and Tony Schwen in Wisconsin and sentenced to another 2 consecutive life sentences. Later on, in 1997, despite attempts from the defense to argue that he suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, and despite an attempted escape by Franklin himself, he was sentenced to death for the murder of Gerald Gordon in Missouri. In the same year, he was sentenced to 40 years of imprisonment for the murders of Darrell Lane and Dante Brown. Then, in 1998, to yet another 2 concurrent life sentences for the murder of William Tatum. Despite delays concerning the constitutional admissibility of the method of execution, and despite opposition from the same Larry Flynt, Franklin was injected with a lethal dose of pentobarbital at the Eastern Reception Diagnostic and Correctional Center in Bonne Terre, Missouri, on the 20th of November 2013. He didn't make any final statement. 3 days before, he revealed to a local newspaper he had renounced his racist views and that he considered black people people just like us. Method of action. On his own account, Franklin carefully planned every shooting, down to what kind of clothing he would wear. The night before, he would place the weapon in the site he had chosen, its serial number filed off, knowing that it would be abandoned after the crime was completed. On one occasion, in order to stabilize his aim, he used a telephone pole in which he planted, partway, a nail wrapped with cloth. He would wear gloves while handling potential evidence. Occasionally, he would steal a bicycle to take him from the firing position to his car, a 1975 Chevrolet Camaro, so that witnesses would not be able to identify him. He also had a police scanner to monitor their activities. Before attempting to assassinate Larry Flynt and Vernon Jordan Jr., he admitted stalking them for about a year. FBI profiler John Douglas classified Franklin as an assassin personality. He came from an abusive childhood, turned into an inadequate loner as an adult, and eventually tried to compensate for this by adhering to an ideology that enabled him to feel worthy by considering someone else unworthy or inferior. For the same reasons, he changed his name and became adept at marksmanship, a way of compensating for his eyesight impediment. The fact that he shot his victims from long distances seems to imply he felt comfortable only in situations he could control completely. He ultimately committed his crimes for personal satisfaction, to vent his rage, and to make a name and a reputation for himself. Franklin is impressively similar to Swedish serial shooter John Ausonius. Both were right-wing extremists and assassin personalities who changed their names and appearances to cope with their inadequacy and did poorly at school, associated themselves to extremist groups, committed shootings with rifles targeting people they deemed inferior. In Franklin's case, Jews and African Americans, and Ausonius's immigrants, though he was also suspected of killing a Jewish woman, escaped at least one time a crime scene on a bicycle, and were involved in at least one assassination of a political personality. Ausonius was briefly suspected of the assassination of Olof Palme, while Franklin committed 3 separate attempts on the lives of Jewish lobbyist Morris J. Amitay, magazine publisher Larry Flynt, and civil rights activist Vernon Jordan Jr. Both also committed bank robberies as a means to sustain themselves.